Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I'm here with my co-host, Matt Scott.
I'm kind of over here.
Yeah,
I'm here.
Exactly.
We're here with Brad McCarthy, Australian explorer, also the MAXTRAX guy.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're very lucky to have Brad on, one of the most prolific travelers in all of Australia. He started the Dirty Weekends book series, which anyone who's traveled Australia knows that it is a wealth of information for traveling the backcountry of Australia. And amazing stories. Brad and I have done some fun adventures together. Matt and Brad have done some fun adventures together. In fact, we drove across Australia all the way to Perth a few years ago, across the Great Australian Bight and everything. And that was a fantastic trip. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys. Welcome.
Yeah. Well, where should we start? So I want to know about, well, actually, I know all of these things, but
they're fascinating.
So they're really fascinating. So you've always kind of been into four-wheel drives. Started off as a plumber, and then guidebooks, and then MAXTRAX, and then running a major company, and just the trajectory of Brad has just been like up. But I think the coolest thing with Brad is that Brad always makes time to explore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you've never gotten away from what you love.
No, it's in my DNA.
And special thanks to Equipped for supporting today's podcast. More than 15 years ago, Equipped Expedition Outfitters became the first American company to import the best-in-breed vehicle expedition equipment from across the globe. Since their humble beginnings, they have risen to become a go-to leader within the adventure travel industry, continuing to deliver a diverse portfolio of reliable, long-lasting products backed by unparalleled customer service. From shelter solutions from Easy On to portable fridges from National Luna to aluminum storage boxes from Alubox, their ever-growing selection of best-in-class gear increases your capability, comfort, and confidence during any adventure. Visit equippedone.com to gear up.
Yeah. I've got to see what's over that hill or around that bend.
Yeah.
And I've been like that since I was a kid. Yeah. I think it started, my old man used to look after like knock down sugar mills and power stations and those sort of things back in the day. And he'd throw my brother and I in the car and we'd go for a drive to have a look at a job. And that job might be 1,000 k's from home, but we'd have a packet of biscuits and a couple of cans of soft drink and that'd be it, you know. So, but we'd be driving to a town somewhere and he'd see a dirt road and he'd turn off the dirt road and we'd drive down to a beautiful beach, something like that. And I think that was ingrained in me from a young age. And it just went from there. So, you know, when I was 15, I got offered an apprenticeship as a plumber. And at that stage, unemployment in Australia was 11%. My old man said, get a job as a plumber. You'll be 19. You'll have a plumber's license to print money.
Yep.
And if you don't like it, you can go and do something else. So it wasn't what I really wanted to do with my life. But, you know, the opportunity was there. I took it and I did that for about 20 years. So got to the point where I was working in major construction sites, you know, hospitals, shopping centres, hotels, casinos, that sort of stuff. And the weekend would come and I would head for the hills. And it was my escape from, you know, the noisy city to the beautiful natural environment we have in southeast Queensland. And I just, over the years, built up this knowledge of all these amazing places within 3 or 4 hours drive of my home. And because I only had weekends to spare, I had 2 or 3 days to go and explore these places. So I'd go to the local government map shop and get the forestry maps or the national park maps and plot a route and you know, look at the map and go, oh, there's a waterfall there, there's a patch of rainforest, there's a few creek crossings to make it interesting. And I go exploring and I just loved it. But in the back of my head, I was sort of thinking, I'm spending a lot of money on fuel and repairs and gear, and why am I doing this? But it was basically building my skills, building my knowledge of the place, and that became valuable. You know, I'd get to a job on a Monday and the car would be dirty. I'd still have all my camping gear in the car on the roof, and guys would come up on the job site and say, oh, Macca, where have you been? And I'd say, oh, Fraser Island or the Conondales or Sundown National Park. And this is pre-internet. This is like the mid-90s. And I'd have a photo album, so I'd bring a photo album and show them the place that I was talking about, and they'd be like, wow, how do I get there? What do I need to know? Mm. So in the end, I ended up with these fact sheets. So I had a mud map and the details of, you know, where it starts, where it finishes, how far it was, what the terrain was like, what the highlights of the place were, and a little mud map with the number 1, 2, 3, 4 along the map showing you where to go, what to see. And, I was on a job at one stage there. I was looking after a major casino building in the middle of Brisbane, and I had 50 plumbers working under me, and I had a folder with all the plumbing stuff in it, and I had another folder with all the dirty weekend stuff in it. And I'd be constantly handing out fact sheets to people. And one day I came out of a site meeting, and the head architect for this job sort of pulled me aside and said, "I've heard you're the man to talk to about places to go four-wheel driving in southeast Queensland." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "We've just bought a Land Cruiser and a camper trailer." And he said, "I want to get the family into it. I want to, I know what's out there, but I don't know how to find it." So I gave him a couple of fact sheets over the next few months, and he came in one day and he said, "We're hooked." He goes, "What else have you got?" And I said, "Well, what else do you want to do? What do you want to see?" And he said to me, "You should put this in a book." He said, "This is gold. You can't find this anywhere." And that was for me the light bulb moment to go, I can go and do what I love and hopefully make a living out of it.
Yeah.
And so I spent the next 12 months basically going out, doing the trips, meticulously mapping every turn, every bridge, every gate, every cattle grid. And I don't like to backtrack. So I tried to make the tours starting at A and finishing at Z and not coming back or backtracking,
Sure.
So I did I spent the next 12 months doing it. And I'm still a one-finger typer, so I spent the next 12 months every night working under my next-door neighbour's house on his little tiny computer, typing up spreadsheets with the distance between the trip notes, the details, and then the GPS coordinates for every single trip note. And then launched the book at the Brisbane 4-Wheel Drive Show in 1999. And I had a wall of photos, my old 60 Series Cruiser covered in dirt, and people were just coming up looking at the photos, picking up the book and going, "Take my money."
Yeah.
And I went, "I'm onto something here." So I ended up doing 6 editions of that guide. And in the meantime, I did a guide to Fraser Island, which is the world's largest sand island and one of my favourite places. So
beautiful. In fact, if I remember your story correctly, it was Fraser that got you your first 4-wheel drive, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, we went on a day trip from the Sunshine Coast to Fraser Island, and I was just blown away that something so magnificent. It's the world's largest sand island, all national park. It's got over 100 freshwater lakes, some of them surrounded by rainforest, beautiful white sand. Just a magnificent
paradise.
place.
It is paradise.
Yeah. Well, the traditional owners call it Gurry, which means paradise, and it truly is, So we went there, and I went, "This place is 3 hours from my house. I'm getting a 4-wheel drive." So I bought an ex-Army Land Rover and the old soft top.
Sure.
Had many. Usually don't tell people that.
Yeah. I try to keep that on the down low. Being
so
a Toyota man that I am.
It all started with a Land Rover, I see. I think that makes all of us here.
Common theme.
And then I drove a mate's Land Cruiser one day and I went, "Sell that, get a Land Cruiser." So that was what really got me into it. And I thought, if this is 3 hours from my house, I'm coming back. I'm getting a 4-wheel drive and I'm coming back. And I've probably been to Fraser Island 50 times in the last 30 years and I can never get enough of the place. It's magnificent, and it's one of those special places in the world. And for me, it's in my backyard, so that makes it even better.
Yeah, I mean, it's just literally a run up the beach for you now, which is pretty handy. I mean, when was the first time you were on Fraser Island, for your own trip? Like, when did you start doing the guidebook to Fraser Island?
That would have been 2001. Okay. The first trip was probably mid 80s, I think, when we went on a tour, and then I think I bought the old Landy in about 1988 or 89, something like that.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's one of those things where I live on the Sunshine Coast now, and it's a 15-minute drive to the ferry, and then it's a 100-kilometre drive up the beach, and then a 20-minute drive on the ferry, and I'm on Fraser Island. So, and then I've got 125 kilometres of beach that I can drive on, and numerous kilometres of tracks to explore, and forests and lakes, and it's just heaven.
And what's that beach that you drive on before you get on the ferry to Fraser?
Tiwa Beach.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I drove that Earth Cruiser on that. That was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an amazing place.
Yeah, it was so cool.
I mean, the whole area of Southeast Queensland, I don't know, I have a soft spot in my heart for it because of you. I mean, just all the times I've been over there and the things I've been able to see that, going to the Glass House Mountains, and I don't know. I mean, I guess I really encourage any of our listeners that if you're looking for a beautiful place to explore and you don't maybe necessarily have the time to drive, across Australia or do Cape York or do the Simpson or whatever, Southeast Queensland is I mean, truthfully, one of the most beautiful places on the planet, I think, to explore by 4-wheel drive.
Yeah,
and Brisbane, what a city.
Brisbane's such a special place.
It's my favorite city in Australia.
home of the 32 Olympics too.
Oh, really? Is that okay.
Yeah, so
That's exciting.
very exciting. A lot of infrastructure happening at the moment, road upgrades and rail upgrades and all that sort of thing. So a bit of roadworks and that around, but where I am on the Sunshine Coast is not really affecting us at this stage. But yeah, it is an amazing part of the world, and I think it's just its location. Its latitude is such that you get the tropical and the subtropical species, and also the temperate species. So the diversity of wildlife is quite amazing, and the same with the flora. The plants can sort of grow in Brisbane, and the southeast Queensland region don't grow too much further north or too much further south. And the population of southeast Queensland is probably about 5 million people. Significant. Yeah. And Queensland itself is, if you combine, say, California, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah, they'll all fit into Queensland. So, Queensland's
a big place.
It's a big place to explore.
It's crazy, like when you leave Brisbane, how long it takes you
to get anywhere.
I mean, I remember the first trip we did up. Well, not your first trip, but the first trip I did up Cape York with you. It felt like we were driving for 2 weeks straight, and then all of a sudden Papua New Guinea is there, and then you can't go any farther, and then you're like, but I don't want to go back.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's a big place, and that's just Queensland. So to drive across to the West Coast, we've done a few trips where it's a good solid week if you're non-stop driving to get to the West Coast. From Brisbane to Perth is about 4,200 kilometres. So pretty much New York to San Fran or New York to LA.
Yeah.
And not much in between.
And those are dirt roads.
Yeah, there's a lot of dirt. Yeah.
You can't go east to west on pavement unless you're along the coast. So if you're in the middle, you're on dirt.
Yeah, Highway 1 basically circumnavigates the country.
Yeah.
And if you want to go through the middle, it's dirt. Bush highways that are maybe 4 lanes wide, and every now and again there's a tarred section with some aircraft landing strips on it for the flying doctor.
Yeah, I always try and remind people that it's not that the infrastructure in Australia is poor. It's not. It's just that it's different. You're on a 2-lane highway, and then you're still going through the small towns. It just takes longer to get places. The Bruce Highway, for example, that runs from Brisbane. Where does that end? Does that go to Cairns?
Cairns,
yeah. Yeah, that's, for most of it's 2-lane, and that's the major road in Queensland. And I mean, I think that's wonderful and awesome. But, Americans tend to get this opinion like, oh, well, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to drive from Brisbane to Cairns in a day, and then I'm going to go to, Uluru the next day. And you're like,
no, you're not.
Chance.
No, you're not.
No.
No chance.
Not happening.
Everything is a long way apart. I mean, most of the population, I think 90% of the population is along the coastline, and focused on the big cities like the capital cities of Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, everyone would know. So the rest of the country is fairly sparsely populated. A lot of little country towns, there might be 15 people.
Wonderful people in them, though. I mean, so we've kind of talked about where you came from. We've talked about traveling, a little bit in Southeast Queensland. But what I know Brad for, what I think you know Brad for, are these massive trips where you're going for a month or 2 months, and you don't necessarily bring like a lot of like luxury stuff with you, so to speak. Like you're not in an Earth Roamer, you're usually in a Land Cruiser, and then you have a swag and you throw it on the ground, and you're going like it charges you. Like I think everybody around you knows like Brad has to get out, and you come back with this, this fire in you. I mean, what was that? What was your first big trip? Like, what was the transition from Southeast Queensland Brad to
crossing Australia
and doing these crazy adventures?
Well, once I had the success with the Southeast Queensland book, I thought, well, there's a need for this right around Australia. Most people are working, have only got a few days to have a break. And, as I said, Queensland's a massive state. So the plan was to do a guide for each region. So the next guide I did was Central Queensland. So it's a coastline between, Bundaberg and, say, Bowen on the east coast, and out as far as the Carnarvons and the Great Sandstone Belt out in the Central Queensland area. So I did that guide, and then the plan was to do a guide for North Queensland and Cape York, and then do one for the Northern Territory, one for the Kimberley region in northwestern WA.
I've not been there yet.
Yeah, it's a magnificent place.
Hint, hint, Brad. We haven't been there.
Have you not been there yet either?
No.
Oh, yeah.
Just give me a call.
That's been the universal thing. If I ask people who are well-traveled in Australia, I'm like, what's the most remote beautiful. They all say the Kimberley.
Yeah, it's an amazing place. So, so the idea was I would just do a series of guides around Australia. I'd just keep doing laps of Australia and updating the book every couple of years. And the books were selling well, so I was like, I can make a good living and I can be doing what I love every day of the week, And that was the plan. And then I was doing the field research for the North Queensland and Cape York guide, and I drove out onto this remote beach. And I was on my own. I was meeting with a mate in a...
Do you remember what beach it was?
Yeah.
Because I want to go there one day.
It's a place called Cape Bowling Green.
Okay.
So it's south of Townsville, but back in those days it was quite remote. And I drove out onto this beach, and I started, because there's an old lighthouse and some graves and that at the end of this peninsula. So it's just a sand spit that pokes out into the Coral Sea, and it's about 30 or 40 kilometres long. So I'm driving along the beach, following what I assume was a little Suzuki or something. It was only leaving a very shallow tyre track, and I'm in a 3.5 tonne Land Cruiser. And I started to bog down through this sand, and I thought, this isn't good. And then I look ahead and I see dead mangrove trees coming down to the water's edge. And I thought, mangrove mud, that stuff's not real good. So I tried to turn the car around to leave, and I broke through this crust of sand into this black mangrove mud, and the car just bellied out. And I thought, this is going to be fun. So I got on the radio. No one within cooey of the radio. Nobody around. This is pre, satellite phones and mobile phones. So I thought, well, this is it. So I had a hand winch. I didn't want to go any further forward. I tried to go back on my tracks and just couldn't get any traction. The wheels were just spinning in midair. So got the winch out, got the hand winch out, got the old turfer, found a tree up on the sand dune, and ran every single rope and strap that I had out to that, tied it on, got it going, put the tension on it and pulled the tree out of the ground. Then there was another tree on about a 45-degree angle, and did the same thing, tried it, pulled it out of the ground. So then I thought I'm going to have to get the tyre out from underneath and bury the tyre and winch off the tyre, right? So, and of course it's sitting on the belly, and the tyre was under the back of the fuel tank. So I had to sort of dig all this slop out from under the car, get the wheel out, dig a trench, hook it all up, and start winching off the spare tyre. So in the meantime, this is hours going by, and the tide started to turn. So the tide's lapping under the car. So I'm dealing with all this slippery, greasy, black, oily mud, and it's 30 degrees and sunny, and I'm just working my butt off to try and get this car out with this hand winch. And you've used a winch,
sure.
You're doing half an inch at a time and making a little bit of progress. But I was shoveling dry sand in. I put the floor mats in. I was shoving whatever I could in under the tyres, and I was picking up bits of driftwood like logs and things and shoving them in to try and get up onto the sand. And everything, things would slide off and get jammed underneath, and I have to try. I had an air jack. I'm trying to jack the car up to get the debris out, and anyway, so it got to the point where it's probably 6 or 7 hours. I eventually started to get the back up onto the sand again. So I jumped in and just reversed over the winch and the cables and just got the hell out of there up on the high ground, And I just laid down on the beach. I thought, that really sucked. There's got to be a better way than that. If you had your wife with you or your family with you, you'd be getting divorced because it was such a traumatic thing. I nearly lost the car. And I'm looking at the high tide, and the high tide marks 6 foot above the roof of the car, and I'm thinking, I'm a goner, and I'm going to be walking back to the nearest town. So eventually, I got it out, and I just thought, no, never again. If I'm travelling solo around Australia, and I'm going to be encountering these sort of situations all the time, I want something that I can rely on to get me out every time.
Sure.
So that was the impetus for MAXTRAX. So I spent the next couple of months doing the research on that guidebook. And then I came home, and I'd been getting 4x4 Australia magazine since day one, and I trawled through the magazines, and there was nothing that sort of was designed to do that job, and I thought, well, I want it, so I'm going to make it. And so that was a whole 4-year process of how do I do it. I didn't have a clue. I went home, and I was doing some renovations on the house at the time, and I had the back stair treads, the timber stair treads that were about 1 foot wide and about 2 inches thick.
Do you still have those by chance?
Yeah. So,
oh wow!
So I thought, I
version 1.
Yeah, because the issue was like when I was shoving things under the tyre, because everything was greasy. There was nothing. The tyre couldn't grab onto anything. Everything was just sliding all over the place. So I thought I need grip. Whatever it is, it's got to have grip on the top of it. So I got some stainless steel plates made up about probably 3 inches square, radius the corners about half an inch, bent the corners up about about half an inch or 3/8 of an inch. And then bolted them onto these timber stair treads. And then the next time I did a trip, I took these with me. And once you got onto the the metal teeth, the car would just launch out of the hole, and I'm like, that's what I need. But these things were hardwood and they were heavy. They were probably 20 kilos each. And once they're covered in mud and crap, it's 35 kilos each. So I thought I need something that's light. So what I did basically was I wrote my wish list of, I want handles so you can carry it and manoeuvre it. I want to be able to use it as a shovel if you're digging in sand. It's got to have grip on the top and the bottom. It's got to have ramp so you can jam it under the tyre and the tyre can actually grab hold of it. It's got to have those features that, make it work. That make it work. I want to be able to take 20 of them, so that if I'm going somewhere remote and I know I'm going to be in trouble, I've got a portable road on the roof. Yep. So I had my wish list, and I actually created a magazine ad, and it was basically a photo of a car bogged in the middle of a salt pan in the middle of Australia, and it said, "Ever been bogged? Here's a solution." And it had the list of the features of the MAXTRAX, and so that was my spec sheet, and I wasn't sure what to do next. I was sort of lost as to how do I produce this, because I want 20 or 30 of them. And I just happened to be watching a TV show one night, and there was a guy came on, and he just walks down the street with a microphone and a cameraman and walks up to someone and says, "G'day, I'm Brad, what's your name?" and gets their life story out of them over the next half an hour. And I happened to turn it on one night, and he's talking to this guy who was an industrial designer. And the interviewer said, "So what's an industrial designer do?" And he said, "Well, if you've got a TV or a toaster or a lawnmower or a car, an industrial designer designed that product." So I got the yellow pages out, and there's 3 or 4 industrial designers in Brisbane, and one of them who had already won 4 Australian Design Awards. I thought, well, these guys know what they're doing. So I got on the phone the next morning and said, got this idea of this product that I'm trying to make, can you help me? And they said, that's what we do. Come and have a chat. So I went in, and then we spent the next probably 3 years designing it, making prototypes. So we would get a block of HDP, so high density polyethylene, and CNC the profile out of it, and then we'd go and test it and go, "Oh, that's not quite right. It's not ideal. It needs this, needs that." And we made about half a dozen prototypes, and sort of got to the point where we think that's going to work. Went and tested it and went, "Yeah, that works." And then the next thing was making the tool, so the mould, and that was like a big investment and a big plunge. And I had a few people say to me,
mortgage the house.
Yeah, I had a few people say to me, "You sure about this?" And I was like, "Well, I want it, and if I've got a need, there's probably other people that have a similar need. So I think if I do it right, I think it might be a product that I can sell." So so we went and saw the bank manager, and he said, "So what's your plan?" I said, "Well, make them and hopefully someone buys them." And that was it. So, remortgaged the house.
Sure.
Mortgaged the house, and went and had the tool done. And then once we had the tool, then we could test the material. So the guys, obviously the industrial designers, had relationships with the plastics suppliers. So DuPont, a German company called Groupol, GE Plastics, and a couple of Australian companies were making different versions of the product of nylon. And all their experts had said, we think nylon is the right material for this product, what it's got to cope with, the conditions it's going to be used under and all that sort of thing. So they all gave us samples of material, and we had maybe 5 or 6 grades of their different variants of nylon, and we trialled them, put them in the tool, and we ended up with all these different boards in different colours and different materials that we went out and tested, and basically did the Goldilocks until we got it just right, which took a while. It was probably 12 months of testing and refining and testing and refining, and then we went, we think that's the material. And then we went and set off on a 10,000k lap around Queensland. So we basically left Brisbane, drove to Cape York, drove out to the Simpson Desert, crossed the Simpson Desert, and back to Brisbane in a month. So 10,000 k's in a month, towing a camper trailer.
Which pretty much guarantees getting stuck.
Yeah, and in the height of summer. So,
Sure.
Out in the desert it was 50 degrees Celsius, and up north it was probably high 30s. So the sand's like lava, and it's you're guaranteed you're going to get stuck. So every time we got stuck, we'd more or less set up a tripod, put a camera on it, film the video of us using the MAXTRAX to get out. And, so at the end of the trip, we had probably 10 or 15 instances of actually doing a legitimate recovery using the boards. So then we went to the 4-wheel drive show in Brisbane, and almost the same spot where I'd launched the book about 5 years earlier, had the MAXTRAX on display, and I had a pallet of MAXTRAX sitting there, and had the 100 from the trip, covered in red dirt. And we had the screen playing with, all the recoveries on loop. And Ron Moon came up and had a look at, was standing there looking at the video, and I was talking to a potential customer at the time. And Ron Moon was the editor of 4x4 magazine, very experienced,
big deal,
experienced guy. And he's looking at the video and he's shaking his head, and I'm standing behind him, seeing him shaking his head like side to side, thinking, well, that's not good. Ron Moon's shaking his head, you know. And I went up and I said, "Oh, Ron, how are you?" And I'd sent him books over the years to give me a plug in the magazine. And he said, "Brad, is this yours?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I saw you shaking your head." He goes, "I'm shaking my head thinking, why didn't I think of it?" He said, "I can think so many instances where this would have just saved me so much grief, you know." And he said, "This is just sheer genius." He goes, "You're going to sell 1 million of these." I said, "I hope you're right, because I've put the house on it." And that was it. So he said, "Send me some and I'll have a look. I'll play with them and I'll give you a write-up in the magazine." And it sort of went from there, you know. But the hardest part was initially was convincing people that 2 bits of plastic could get your car out. You know, a lot of people were like, "Oh, that's not going to work."
People like hated them at first, like over here. Like it was like, I'm not using those. That's never going to work. It was such a...
It's a learning curve like anything new, any new technology.
Yeah. It was like that in Australia. You know, people were very skeptical, but they'd look at the video and go, "Oh, it seems to work." And then, you know, people would buy them and go and use them and then come back or send us an email and say, "Holy cow, I would have lost my car on the beach if I didn't have the MAXTRAX."
Oh, that was what it was for me. I mean, I had used them successfully, but I always had a winch or there was some other way to get out. But when we were in the canning stock in 14 hours, we were stuck. We built a road.
Yeah.
That was the only way we got out.
Yeah.
We were so deep in the mud.
So that's basically how it all came about, and then it just went from there. It took us quite a few years to sort of get a roll on and actually get people believing in the product. And then, you know, because they're bright orange and they're big and people put them on their roof rack, we would have people ring us and say, "A mate's got some of those orange things. Do you sell them?"
Those spiky orange
Yeah.
things.
So that's how it started, and it just sort of went from there. And you know, then we went to SEMA in 2010.
I remember that.
Yeah, that was quite memorable for us because we rocked up and I just had 3 or 4 mates with me, and we'd booked it in, and we got to SEMA and walked into the exhibition hall in Vegas, and I was like, "Oh, we're playing with the big boys now." You know, Ford was there, Toyota was there, Goodyear, all the big brands, and ARB and TJM and everything, all the Australian 4-wheel drive equipment companies, and I was like, oh, we might be out of our depth here, you know. So we spent a couple of days in the Home Depot car park building a pyramid out of plywood to make a sand dune. So our display at SEMA was we had an FJ Cruiser all sign written, and we had bogged in a sand dune with the MAXTRAX sticking out of the front of it. And we used real sand, so we had boxes and boxes of red sand that we made this sand dune out of. And people were just coming up and shaking their head, and we picked up probably half a dozen international customers at that show, and a couple of awards for best new product in the off-road space. So we walked away from SEMA thinking, well, yeah, we can play with the big boys. You know, we've got the right product and we've done it well. You know, you can do it. It can be done.
So that 10,000K trip, was that at the time the longest you had kind of been out in a 4-wheel drive?
Yeah, that was probably the longest. That was a month. And it was, a month just living out of the car.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I'd done a lot before that. So my car was pretty well set up. I had a good fridge in the back. I had I just used to sleep on a stretcher, and just boxes of food and spare parts and tools. And, you know, that was about it. But it was, you know, I was driving a Toyota. So reliability wise, I knew that I didn't have to take too many spares. And if I did need something, there was help not too far away.
Yeah.
Despite Queensland being quite vast. There's a Toyota dealer in every town, just about.
Mm-hmm. And you're Mr. Land Cruiser.
Yeah, well, I always say to people, if you want to go there and come back alive, it's got to be a Land Cruiser.
There's a great Australian commercial that they ran, and it was like a border checkpoint to go out into the desert. And, you know, people would drive up in some lesser vehicle and they'd turn them around and send them back. And they would only let the people through with a Hilux or a Land Cruiser.
But I think
it was a clever ad. It was a very clever ad.
Until very recently, there just weren't that many vehicles other than Land Cruisers that truthfully could put up with Australian conditions.
The GU Patrol.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, I mean, Land Cruiser arrived in Australia in the 50s when they were building the Snowy Mountains hydroelectric scheme. So Leslie Teese, who had that contract for that, imported a heap of them from Japan, and they were the shorty 40s. And they were mountain climbing through the Snowy Mountains, and people sort of kept them afterwards and went, this thing's unreal.
There's the Land Rover guys in Australia love to tell that same story too, because on the Snowy Mountain Hydro project, they were actually the first vehicles, and I want to say they were Series 1s.
Yeah.
and then they became Land Cruisers for a reason.
So yeah, it's funny because when you the Great Dividing Range runs along the east coast of Australia, pretty much from top to bottom, and once you cross that mountain range, it's pretty flat all the way to the other side of the country.
It is.
There's a few little bumps along the way, but it's pretty flat and lots of sand. And once you cross that mountain range, you can pretty much guarantee 90% of the vehicles you pass will be a Land Cruiser of one variation or another.
Yeah.
So what's been your favorite Land Cruiser then?
Well, I'm driving a 300 series now, and it's pretty damn good.
So you got to talk about this.
Yeah, because we don't get it. We're not going to get it here. I guess we're going to get the Lexus version, but
LX600,
it's pretty different now.
Yeah, we don't get the lockers.
Yep.
We don't get the EKDSS. We don't get the diesel like you do.
Yeah. No, it's a beast. It's like I've had all of them, and the last cars, the 200 series that we had, were really good. You know, the V8 twin turbo, plenty of power, quite comfortable. But the 300's just that next step up. You know, they've had 12 or whatever years to refine it, and it's got the EKDSS, and the ride's amazing. The interior, they've really stepped up. You know, the interior is quite high end now. Yeah, and it's got adjustable suspension, so you can have comfort mode if you feel like it, or you can have Sports Plus or custom or whatever it may be.
That's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool, and you've been there, Scott. You've been there, Matt. You know the corrugations out west and up north can be pretty severe. You know, you can be driving on corrugated road for a couple of days solid.
I remember one time we were on that road north of Adels Grove that goes up towards, heads up north.
Up the Gulf, yeah.
Yeah, and I took a beer can, and I put it in between the corrugations, and I got down on the ground, and I'm like, I can't see the beer can anymore.
It's that deep.
Yeah, they're big, and they shake everything to pieces.
Yeah.
You know? So we did. Actually, I got the car just before Christmas, and we went for a run up to a place called Lawn Hill, which is sort of remote northwestern Queensland. And most people don't go there at that time of year because it's 45 degrees Celsius plus.
Sure.
But I said, well, we're going there because there'll be no one else there, and there wasn't. But we did it about 9,000 k's of that trip, and we were getting about 10.5 litres for 100 k's, which is amazing economy for a car of that size. And we weren't nursing it. So
and they're running a V6 diesel hybrid.
Yeah, no, just V6 diesel twin turbo.
Okay.
So more power and torque than the V8, and a lot more comfortable ride. And just an all-round much better vehicle, really. There's a lot of kickback from people with the V8 saying, "Oh,
I don't know, it looks great. I think it looks better. I think all the technology they brought in it, factory available lockers now. Yeah, it's just so much better.
Yeah, it's a nice car. But my favourite of the lot is my 1943 Jeep. You've actually got to drive that thing. The Cruiser, you're almost sitting in your lounge chair watching.
There is not a photo that exists of you driving that Jeep where you are not grinning ear to ear, like with bugs sticking out of your teeth and everything. I mean, I remember when you first bought it, it was a crazy story. You were just going to have one for a prop.
Yeah.
And they couldn't deliver it, and then you bought one.
Yeah, well, we're going to make a video for SEMA for the first year at SEMA, and the storyline was that we had there was a World War a Jeep bogged in the jungle up in North Queensland. We went up to Cape York to film it, and so we had a couple of Islander guys who were the natives who find the MAXTRAX washed up on the beach. And there's a Jeep stuck in the jungle full of coconuts and coconut palm fronds, and they find it and they go and stick the MAXTRAX in and back it out onto the beach and drive away. And I had the actors organised, I had the film crew organised, and we had them flying into this remote airport, and I had a couple of mates coming up in their cars to be support. And we were leaving on the Thursday to go to the Cape to meet these guys on the Monday, and last minute the guy that was going to lend me his Jeep said, I can't do it, I've got a family thing, can't do it. So madly got on the web and found one in Rockhampton, which is about halfway up the coast. And this guy had one.
How lucky.
This guy had one, and he said, oh, yeah, it's not registered, but I can get it registered. So we got there on the Friday afternoon. I said, well, can you get it registered on Friday? I don't want to be at the transport department trying to register a 70-year-old Jeep that's left-hand drive, no doors, no seat belts, And so he did that. We got there, took it for a drive around this new estate up the hill, and put it in low range and just went, yeah, here's the money. See you later. So we took it up, we did the ad. We made sure we had the ad in the can before we finished. And then we did the rest of the Cape in the Jeep and drowned it in one of the rivers and revived it and drove it and just went, yeah. Well, I got back from the Cape and my wife said, so are you selling that Jeep? I said, no way in hell. That Jeep's going nowhere.
And you still have it?
I still have it, yeah. So it's done a few. We've done a few big trips, and it's been to the Cape again, and it's been across the Simpson, and it's been across the Great Australian Bight. The trip we did, we've taken it right across there.
I remember that.
Yeah, and it's been to Fraser numerous times, and we also have a couple of other sand islands off the coast of Brisbane that we take it to, and at the Glasshouse Mountains, as you said, Matt. And it's just so much fun. You can't help but smile. Everyone that drives it.
I remember the motor not running, putting it in low range, and then you moving it forward by the starter once. I mean, it's just such a different vehicle to what we get these days.
Yeah. It's amazingly capable, though. For something that's that old, they just nailed that design. Like sometimes it puts a Land Cruiser to shame. You put it in some situations.
Well, that was Genesis for all of those things, right? They saw this. The original Land Rover was. It wasn't the original Land Rover built on a Jeep?
On a chassis from a Jeep, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great machine, and it's just, it's so much fun to be driving along a beach, at 60 mile an hour with no doors, no windscreen, no seatbelts,
No roll bar, nothing.
No.
And a special thanks to onX Maps for supporting this week's podcast. For me, being prepared is all about having the right tools. One tool I use is the onX off-road map and navigation app on my phone. I use it to find trails and off-grid camping, and I use the fully functional GPS when I'm out of service. We all know that's usually where the best parts start. It's intuitive to use and lets me find open trails anywhere you want to explore with just a tap on the map. Access detailed trail information like difficulty ratings, duration, clearance level, open and close dates, trail photos, and more. Plus, there's color-coded public and private land boundaries, which are very helpful for when I want to try to find off-grid camping. And like I said before, I want to make sure that this sticks. It has offline maps. This feature allows me to access all interactive land and trail data and custom map markups when I'm out of cell service. Your phone's internal GPS will give you full navigation capabilities offline, so you always know where you are and how to get home safely. Use code Overland Journal today to save 20% off.
I think the really cool thing is you always kind of describe Australia as a bit of a nanny state. You can do this, you can't do this, you can do this, jump this high, whatever. But then, for some reason, the Jeep is legal.
Yeah, I don't know why. Well, apparently the rule is if it didn't come with seatbelts, it doesn't have to have them. So I've been pulled up by the police a few times, and they're like, "Where's the seatbelts?" I'm like, "Are you serious? This car's 75 years old."
So when I roll it, I'm kept in the car and crushed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That is such a fun vehicle that you've got. What other vehicles or equipment that have just delighted you like that? Other things that you've had in your travels?
40 series cruiser, and most of my cars have been for work purposes. For big stuff. I've had a good 100 series that was the original one, and that's 2005. No, sorry, it wasn't the original, but 2005.
Yeah, because you rolled
series.
that up north.
Yeah, well, we had a collision with a sleeping driver on a bridge. The sleeping driver wasn't me.
You didn't roll it. Yeah.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. I had the family in the car. It wasn't very nice, but we got out of it. I think if we were in a car, we probably wouldn't have. But in a cruiser, this guy fell asleep and cleaned us up, and we rolled down the highway about 10 times and ended up on the wheels, and thankfully no serious injuries. The car was a write-off though, but. So the 100 series is that's been the workhorse pretty much since day one. It's done a lot of miles and just reliable. We did some testing. The Australian Army invited me out when they were doing the G-Wagon testing program, and they rang me and said, "Oh, we're going to be doing this testing trip through the Simpson Desert, and we're going to put MAXTRAX on the vehicles. Do you want to come and make sure we're using it properly?" And I was, of course, hands straight up. I'm there. I'll meet you in Alice Springs. And so we did this trip the first time, and there was a few mechanical issues with the G-Wagons. And at that stage, the cruiser, this was end of 2012. So, the cruiser was 7 years old at that stage and done quite a few miles. And, crossed the Simpson Desert, cross-country, no worries at all, no mechanical issues, And then we did another one with 10 G-Wagons in February the following year. So, the hottest time of the year. Same deal, the G-Wagons, pretty much every G-Wagon had some other issue. And
I still love them.
The Cruiser, they look great, but give me a Land Cruiser any day. So the old Land Cruiser just did it again. No issues.
Amazing.
So I spent probably more time in that car than any of them, and it's sitting in the garage at the moment. And every time I walk in, I'm like, I should take it for a drive, but I hop in the 300 and go, oh, maybe not.
I think it understands.
Yeah, I think it might.
Yeah.
It's in retirement now.
Yeah.
It's living a nice life up on the beach.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Gets polished on Tuesdays.
So I got the a drive in one of the 6-wheel drive long range patrol vehicles when we were doing the G-Wagon testing, and in that rough terrain, because in the middle of the Simpson, we were going cross country, and a lot of it's moguls. So there's a shrub and the sand's blowing from away. So you're driving through, and it's walking pace. You can't drive any faster because it's just so rough. And I'm in the wagon and getting belted around, and then I hopped in one of the G-Wagons, and the difference was amazing. So when we finished those trips, I said to this friend who'd set up this business doing 6-wheel drive conversions with the aim of building some 6-wheel drive Land Cruiser patrol vehicles for the military. I said to him, well, if you wait for the military to order you or go bankrupt, it'll take you 10 years before you get a military order. So I said to him, well, build me a 6-wheel drive 200 series. So we did.
Was that the first one?
Yeah. So, and I got the number plate 6WD because every time we pull up somewhere, people would go, is that a lazy axle?
Yeah.
Is that a real 6-wheel drive? Yeah, it's a real 6-wheel drive. And it was, it's great for that sort of long distance expedition. Yeah, expedition stuff. You can carry five adults and all their gear, and do it comfortably, and and go anywhere basically.
Yeah, I was so impressed with how that vehicle did. Because we were remote when we did the Australian Bite. I mean, it was tight trails and really remote.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's a good machine, but it's a little bit on the thirsty side, especially when we're paying the price of fuel that we do down there.
Yeah, sure.
Oh man, I mean, what you were saying, it was like 30 liters.
Yeah,
per
when
100K.
we did the Madigan Line, Mick, that friend of mine who was building the long range patrol vehicles based on a 70 series cruiser, he wanted to test his vehicles on the same route that we did the G-Wagons, and so we're doing that. And they had some issues or they had some problems and they had to wait in Alice Springs. So a friend of mine and I went solo across the Madigan Line in the 6-wheel drive, and we were using 35 litres for 100K because someone had towed a trailer across and just chewed the dunes to pieces. So, it was pretty rugged.
Yeah.
And it was, it's a heavy vehicle. It's about 5 ton. So
it's like a TRX. Probably 40,
I think the TRX would have done
years.
a little bit better in the dunes.
Yeah, well, for sure. Yeah. You jump from one to the next. Yeah.
So I think we should talk about what the Madigan Line is for people that don't necessarily know what it is. I mean, it's a remote northern route across the Simpson Desert.
Yeah. So the Simpson Desert's one of those bucket list items for people in Australia with a 4-wheel drive. It's about 600 k's across. It's the world's largest parallel sand dune desert. So there's about 1,100 parallel sand dunes that run southeast to northwest. And on the eastern side in Queensland, they're sort of really high, maybe 60 metres high and 2 kilometres apart. And then as you get further across the desert, they get lower and closer together. So it's a bit of a challenge. Everyone that's got a 4-wheel drive, I want to do that before I die. And there's a few routes across. Most of them were put in by mining companies looking for oil back in the 50s and 60s. So there's a couple of routes that most people take. But the Madigan Line, you have to get permits, you have to get permission from the traditional owners to cross their lands. And it's fairly remote. Most people don't go that way. It was actually plotted by an explorer called Cecil Madigan. He was an Antarctic explorer originally, and then he did a camel trek across there in the 1930s. And it's named the Simpson Desert after a manufacturer of washing machines who was the president of the South Australian Geographical Society, sorry. And so he named the desert
after a washing machine.
Yeah, Simpson is the desert named after the washing machine. So he basically crossed it on camels, and his camps were plotted some years later by one of the 4-wheel drive clubs way back in the day. And so there's a star picket with a sign saying Camp 16 or whatever it may be.
Amazing.
So it's basically drive across the desert and just join the dots. And, these days with GPS, it's quite easy to navigate. But back in the day, it would have been, on a compass bearing and you can't drive straight on sand dunes. So quite challenging. So not a lot of people have done it. And now with some of the restrictions, it's becoming more and more difficult to actually get a permit to do it. So that's one of those things where it just feels, and for me, I love that sense of remoteness. I just love that There's no other human being for however many 100 kilometres.
Recharging.
Yeah, it's just, I think when you're in those environments, everything's your senses are all heightened. You know, you hear everything, you smell everything. You know, it's just one of those places where you feel alive.
Yeah.
And for me, I do. I just, that really brings me to life when I'm out there. And that's why I enjoy it, I suppose. I just, any chance to go on an expedition, I'm there.
Yeah. And the other one, is it the French line?
Yeah, the French line goes.
Kind of the standard.
Yeah.
That's more
Crossing,
of
yeah.
a standard crossing.
Yeah.
I mean, not that it's still not fun and amazing and that you shouldn't do it when we say standard crossing.
Yeah.
It's maybe that.
It's still big.
It's still a challenge for most people that have never done much sand driving. You know, it's same thing. You're still crossing 1,100 sand dunes, but it gets a lot more traffic, so you have to be aware of oncoming traffic over the dunes. Everyone's on the same radio channel, and then there's another road sort of down the bottom of the desert called the Rig Road, and that was actually put in for the drilling rigs to get out into the desert. So it was, they clay capped all the dunes, so they dug the clay out of the clay pans and capped the dunes, but that's all eroded in the last 60 years. So
Sure.
that's pretty challenging as well. But yeah, the Madigan's probably the toughest route across the Simpson.
For sure.
Yeah, but the most fun.
Yeah. And what's the track that goes north? That
The Canning Stock? Or-
No.
In the Simpson, there's
in
the Hay
Simpson-
River.
Hay River,
And
yeah.
there's the K1 line.
Yeah.
And then there's the Colson track that runs on the western side.
Colson track. That's the one I'm doing. Because you've done that one before, right?
Yeah, I've done pretty much all of them a few times.
Yeah.
It's one of my favourite places too, the Simpson, because it's that sense of, it's that excitement of heading into the wilds, you know, where you're self-reliant. You know, you have to be on your game, and you have to be careful and, you know, be well prepared and know what you're doing, because, you know, you can come to grief.
Yeah.
People have come to grief out there.
Well, and if I remember, you were in a UTV one time and nearly came to grief.
Yeah, well, it was funny. We were testing the 6-wheel drive Land Cruiser patrol vehicles, and we'd come in from the French line heading north to, there's a tripod in the middle of the desert, the geographic centre of the desert. And the plan was to get to that tripod and then get to the Madigan Line, which is about 100-something k's further north, and then head out towards Alice Springs in the middle of Australia. And we had a cameraman with us, was filming it for the content and the commercial for the product. And the guys that we were travelling with are Army, so 6 o'clock in the morning, they're gone, and we'd had a late night editing and downloading footage and stuff, and we got to bed at midnight, and so we woke up and they're up the track somewhere. So I got on the radio, I said, you know, do you want to wait for us, because we're trying to film this, you know, this is the bit we want to film, going cross country through the middle of the Simpson Desert. And they said, oh, we'll wait for you. Anyway, long story short, the cameraman and I were in a Razor, Polaris Razor, and got separated. And,
Who was it again?
oh, it's a mate called Tom.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't Geordie.
Okay.
And so we got to the point where we were following tracks, and then the tracks split, because there was three other vehicles, and they split, and we went left, and, you know, off we went, followed this track, and after about an hour and a half, it petered out, and I went, I don't really want to backtrack. I don't like backtracking, so I just went, and I had my phone with the HEMA Maps app on it, and I knew we were about 100 k's sort of southeast of the geocenter, and I said, we'll just head northwest, you know, we'll get there eventually. And the guy that was with me was sort of like, really? So after about 5 hours, we got to this area, and it's hard to believe, but it looked familiar. You know, it all looks the same. But I got to this part, and I just had this sense that this looks a bit familiar from when we were out there with the G-Wagons, and because we'd been there in the G-Wagon convoy. So I said, I think we're getting close. So I turned the phone on, and we were about 5 kilometres east of the geocenter. So we drove across to the tower, expecting these guys to be there, and they weren't there. and the guy I was with was starting to panic a bit. Like, we're in the middle of the Simpson, literally the centre of the Simpson Desert.
This is remote.
And we're it. And we had water, but we didn't have any food, and it was winter time, so night time's freezing.
Sure.
So we only had T-shirts and shorts on, and it was like, what are we going to do? And I said, well, you know, we'll gather up some firewood, which is not a lot of it. It's basically just spinifex. So I said, we'll just get as much stuff that can burn as possible while it's daylight. You don't be walking around in the dark with snakes everywhere. So I said, we'll get as much stuff as we can. We'll build a pile, and then we'll just set the fire, point the car in the direction these guys will be coming from, and we took the seats out, sat them in front of the car because it was quite breezy, and just lit the fire and just sat there and waited, you know. And then about 9 o'clock at night, we saw headlights crest a dune, and it turns out they were about 20 kilometres away, and they took about another 3 hours to get to us. But the whole time we were there, I was just thinking, this is, you know, the moon was off, and it was just fantastic. I was just thinking, this is amazing. And he was starting to panic, and he said, you know, what are we going to do if they don't come? I said, oh, we'll be fine. You know, I said, got 5 wheels on the Razor. We can burn as smoke signals if we need to. And then a jet flew over between probably Alice Springs and Sydney, and I said, you know, we're going right SOS in sticks on the clay pan and light that at about 8 o'clock tomorrow night. They might see it. There's a couple of idiots down there lost, you know. But it all turned out for the best. They came and arrived at about midnight, and I sort of said I was hoping you guys wouldn't come for a couple of days. I was loving it. It was great. But and that was just, I mean, that's just probably experience that I didn't panic. I just went, you know, we got to get there, and this is how you do it. You know, just navigate by the sun and you know, pull out the technology when you can.
Yeah, because you didn't want your battery to go
Yeah,
flat.
well, I didn't have a charger, so the battery was about 10% on the phone. So I was turning it on and checking and turning it off, and you know.
Brad now compulsively brings chargers with him everywhere.
Well, the ironic thing was we had a bug out bag with a sat phone, an EPIRB, flares, you know, fire lighting equipment ×3, all that sort of stuff, and it was in one of the cars. So yeah, you can be prepared, and then things can still go pear-shaped. But
That's right.
I think the thing is it's experience, and it's not panicking when you're in those situations where, you know, it could have turned bad. It could have been really bad.
For sure.
If they couldn't have found us, who knows? I mean, it would have been, you know, as I said, lighting the tyres on fire and then lighting the buggy on fire, and then if that didn't work, you know, walking back along our tracks to the main track,
Right.
and hoping that someone came along in the next week or so, you know. So it pays to be prepared, but sometimes you just got to use the old grey matter as well.
And do you still drive UTVs at all?
Yeah, you can't drive them legally in Australia most places. You know, there's
Yeah.
properties where you can take them and drive them. There's a lot of cattle stations that are the size of small countries that you can drive around. And
I just remember we were at the sand dunes in the south by the Great Australian Bight, and you were going to demonstrate a rollover.
yeah, I think I broke.
It's the first. It's the
Demonstrate
first
a
time.
rollover.
It's the first time. No, he's what he said. He says, "I'm going to go roll the UTV."
We had to do a bit of. We were going to test some of the gear, and we were going to do a winching exercise. So I thought, well, we'll just roll the Razor over, and we can just winch that back on its wheels. But I hit it a little bit hard, and
You did.
over I went and cracked a couple of ribs. So I had broken ribs for the rest of the trip across the Bight.
I remember that.
Yeah, that's the second time that's broken my ribs, I think.
That's why I was wondering if you still drive them.
Yeah, we call that buggy tippy because it's been on its roof that many times.
Well, it rolled over one time when one of the other guys was driving
Yeah,
it. You told him, you said it's going to roll over really easy, and sure enough, there it went. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, no, I get to drive occasionally. It's always fun, but yeah, the Jeep's still a favourite.
Yeah.
So you've obviously had some changes. You have more time in your life now. What's next? Like, not next like business idea or whatever. I want to know where you're going next, and I want to know how I come with.
Well, I think, you know, I've got, as I said early on, I've got that DNA. You know, I've got that explorer gene. I remember a while back they isolated a gene, and it's the risk-taking gene, and it's only 20% of us have it. You know, and our ancestors were the ones that went out of the cave and looked over the hill and
What's
brought
over there?
back the food. You know, and
Or sailed a boat all the way to Australia.
Yeah, exactly,
sure.
exactly. Those people with that adventurous spirit, and I've got it. And you know, I sort of class myself as an explorer because it doesn't matter to me whether I'm exploring a desert or an island or a jungle or a city. You know, it's exploring. It's new things. It's new encounters. It's new people. It's new environments, new wildlife. You know, that whole thing of just novelty, I suppose. I can't get enough of it. So now that I've got a clean, empty calendar, you know, there's a lot of places on this big blue ball that I want to have a look at and experience for myself firsthand. You know, that trip that you and I did to Namibia, Matt, back in the beginning, just before COVID.
Just like opens your eyes to like.
Yeah, that was the last time I saw you was in Namibia. I just realized that.
Yeah. So, you know, things like that where it's just so different
It was South Africa. We were in South Africa together after Namibia.
Oh,
right?
that's right. So it was after that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, those new experiences, new places, totally different to where you live, you know, new cultures. I just love it. So, girlfriend and I are going to Italy for a month in August.
Cool.
And then when we come back, I'm sort of planning a Trans-Australia trip from the east coast to the west coast, straight through the middle in probably September, October.
Yeah.
So,
and you're like messing around with van life now too.
Yeah. We were up North Queensland in September last year, and there was a young couple that pulled up in one of the campsites and had MAXTRAX on the roof. So I went up and said good day and had a chat and gave them a couple of key rings and stickers and patches. And I said to them, "Where are you heading? Where you been?" And they're doing the lap of Australia, having a year off, and COVID, perfect timing, you know.
Yeah.
And they said, you know, we're doing the lap. We're going to go down to Melbourne, and then we're going to basically offload the van. We're going to Tassie, and we're going to offload the van. Pardon me. And I said, yeah, I'll be interested in buying it off you if you're keen. So it's a Mercedes Sprinter short wheelbase 4x4.
Yeah.
And I went, that's the way to travel. So I said, leave it in Tasmania. I've got a friend who's got a house in Tassie, and so they left it down there, and we did the deal, and went down in April and drove around for a couple of weeks in Tasmania. And
So good.
Oh, it's fantastic. You know, the weather in Tassie can be
amazing.
It's an amazing place, but it can be sketchy. You know, we had pretty good weather, but to be able to just pull up somewhere, climb into bed, not have to worry about setting up a tent, whatever. Doesn't matter if it's raining, if it's snowing, if it's blowing a gale. It's a pretty good way to travel. It's a bit better than, you know, sleeping on a stretcher next to the Jeep, that's for sure.
And then we talked a little bit at lunch. You did a little sailing recently, and that was fun.
Yeah, well, we it's a couple of years back. I've always wanted to do the Whitsundays. Like the Whitsundays is a bunch of about 74 islands off the central Queensland coast. So beautiful chain of islands, and it's very popular for sailing holidays. And you can sail yourself. So you charter the boat, and you can grab half a dozen friends and just go where you like for a couple of weeks. And so we did that, and you had to have some sailing experience before you could do it. So we went, three of the crew and I went and did a sailing course a couple of weeks before so that we could rent the boat. And we're out on Moreton Bay off Brisbane, and the day we went out it was blowing 35 knots, and we were the only boat out there, and we're in a monohull. And the guy gave us the basics and then let us go, and we were just skipping across Moreton Bay at 35 knots. So I was just thinking, this is great. It's a whole other world. It's a whole other world. So, you know, that's potentially in the future is something on the water. You know, I've got a jet ski that I go out. There's a little island off the coast that I go out to occasionally, and you can snorkel and dive and swim around, and, you know, lots of marine life and that. But and that's easy because it's, you know, me or my girlfriend.
Aren't you running the thing out to Moreton?
Yeah, we've been across to Moreton Island a couple of times.
That's like a pretty serious crossing.
Yeah, it's about probably 25, 30 k's across the bay.
How long does it take on your jet ski?
Oh,
because you've got a pretty big one.
Yeah, it's about half an hour if it's calm. The thing with Moreton Bay is it can chop up really, really badly. So you've got to go early in the morning and sort of get back before lunch because, you know, the breeze comes in and turns it into a washing machine in the afternoon. So but it's one of those things. And the same thing, it's exploring. You know, there's a nice river near where I am, and you can drive 50 k's up this river on the jet ski. So
cool. Is that Noosa River?
No, the Maroochy River.
Okay.
You know, so you've got a lot of natural environment there. There's bits of it where you go up these little creeks and you could be in the Amazon, you know, and it's in my backyard. So it's that explorer, you know. I get on the jet ski and I go, what's up there and what's out there, and you know, I can't help myself.
That explorer gene, you know, something you told me a long time ago. It stuck with me because you see correlation between, like, well, for you, like father and daughter. I think it's so cool that Lauren's out there in her Sprinter doing the same thing, and, you know, like Ray Highland with his kids doing the same thing. Like it's a certain person that just has to go. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, you can't help yourself. I mean, my eldest daughter, she, as you said, she's doing the van life thing. She's been on the road for about 6 months, travelling around Australia. Yeah. And her sister went down and spent a month with her doing South Australia and the Red Centre recently. So, they've got it. But, I mean, they were camping with us when they were babies. You know, I think the first time we went to Fraser Island, Lauren was about 6 weeks old.
You're telling me that story where they were going up to Coober PD or something. Yeah. They take this dirt track that's like 100 k's long, and it's like, I don't know, we might make it. I'm like, yeah, she's definitely a McCarthy.
Exactly. She wasn't too perturbed. I said, just ring me when you get to the other end. You know? When you get to a town and you got network, just give me a call to make sure you got through. Otherwise, I'll have to drive down there and get you.
This content is brought to you by Overland Journal, our premium quality print publication. The magazine was founded in 2006 with the goal of providing independent equipment and vehicle reviews, along with the most stunning adventures and photography. We care deeply about the countries and cultures we visit and share our experiences freely with our readers. We also have zero advertorial policy and do not accept any advertiser compensation for our reviews. By subscribing to Overland Journal, you're helping to support our employee-owned and veteran-owned publication. Your support also provides resources and funding for content like you are watching or listening to right now. You can subscribe directly on our website at overlandjournal.com. You know, there's a couple things that we like to ask the people that come on the podcast. One of them is, are there any books that you have found in your life, or business or travel or anything else that you've really, other than the ones that you've written yourself, but is there a book that you've really kind of identified with?
There's quite a few actually. It's hard to nail one down, but I'm, being an explorer, I like to read about the explorers. So I've read a lot of the journals of some of the Australian explorers, and Australia's a pretty tough country to explore on foot back in the day. Oh, yeah. Before aircraft and all that. So some of the Edward John Eyre, who went through the middle of Australia, John McDowell Stewart, Matthew Flinders, some of the navigators.
Yeah, Matthew Flinders is an amazing guy.
Yeah, I mean James Cook that sort of discovered the East Coast. All of those guys, Captain Bligh, William Bligh that survived that mutiny on the Bounty in Tahiti back in the day. Those guys, I've read all their journals and all the books about those guys, and a lot of my friends have said, you were born 200 years too late. You should have been born when those guys were out there because you've got the same genes that they had. So a lot of those books that I've read over the years, for me, like John Eyre that walked across the track that we did across the Bight, he basically walked that in the height of summer, barely survived, but did it on foot. 1,700 kilometres. Insane.
Unbelievable.
So you read those stories and you just go, for me, and the beauty I think of Australia is you can go to those places that are in these journals that these guys are discovering firsthand, and it's the same. 250 years later, you're looking at the same scenery that one of the early explorers saw, and nothing's changed.
Yeah, you can still go see like trees where like Burke and Wills etched their stuff into.
Yeah. So for me, that's probably one of the thrills, is to be in one of those places where Captain James Cook stood on that hill in 1770 and looked up the coast and saw this, and I'm looking at the same view and it hasn't changed in 250 years. I mean that, and a lot of those places you need a four-wheel drive to get to, and that's probably for me that's why I got a four-wheel drive. It's not to put all the gear on it, make it look flash and all that. It's a tool to get me to those places where you can't get in an ordinary vehicle.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the last question we like to ask, which is someone that's getting new to traveling, new to overlanding. What is a couple pieces of advice that you would give them, having seen the world like you have?
I think it's preparation is key. A good vehicle, a good reliable vehicle. You don't need to have 40-inch tyres and 6-inch lift and all that. My first off-road vehicle was a Ford Laser. And I used to get that thing stuck a fair bit, because it was never meant for that sort of job. But I used to take it bush before I had a four-wheel drive, and it did the job. It wasn't as comfortable. I couldn't take as much gear, but I used to have a sleeping bag in the back, an axe and a shovel, and an esky and a gas stove. And I used to that was my exploration machine, because that's all I had and that's all I could afford. But I still had to get out there and do it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's preparation. The vehicle is the key, but you can do it in a stock vehicle. Most places you want to go, you can do it in a stock vehicle with decent tyres. And
your new Jimneys. Your fleet of Jimneys that you've staged around Australia.
Yeah, they're that's an amazing little vehicle. We built one, and we sort of did as a tribute to the Jeep. So we've called it Jeepney, and we put the star badges on the side of it and on the bonnet, and it's just a great little car. Like it's so much fun, but it's like the Jeep, but you've got doors, windscreen, airbags, radio, air conditioning,
sure.
ABS. You're not going to die if
and
you roll.
And just like the Jeep, you drowned that one in Nolans Brook too.
True, yeah. Not my fault.
Are we blaming the same person as the Jeep?
No. They didn't seal the snorkel properly.
What other questions you got for our man here?
I think it's cool. You guys have both been a huge inspiration, to me to get out and to explore. I guess mine is kind of my question's a further refinement of Scott's. I think there's more young people that want to go explore now than ever, because I don't want to say the barrier to entry is lower, but it's easier. We have cars, we have reliable cars, we have all the equipment, all the gear. What's your advice for young people that, may get mired in the gear? Like how do you keep it simple? Because I think that's one of the things that, I've noticed in your travel style is that you're pretty minimal. Like I wouldn't call you minimalist, but
pretty minimal.
Pretty minimal. I mean, like what drives you to get out and do it, and how can you offer some advice to the young people to just avoid this stuff and travel?
Well, as I said, it's preparation, and it's having a bit of an idea. when we do a trip, we say we're leaving Brisbane on this date and we hope to be back by this date. And in between, who knows what's going to happen? We work out a rough itinerary, and we plan to a certain extent, but things can change on a daily, on an hourly, on a minute basis. So you have to be adaptable. But I think having a good vehicle, a reliable vehicle, because the last thing you want to be doing is having to call someone when your car breaks down in the middle of nowhere. So that's probably the key. But as I said, good tyres are one of the main things. The first thing I would do on any vehicle is put decent tyres on it. If you're going to actually use it off-road, just tyres. And then it comes down to just the basics, not driving too fast, drive to the conditions, and not driving when you're tired, not driving when you're drunk or you've been on something, and just enjoying it. If you're going to go spend the money to buy the car, put the gear on the car, go out and enjoy it. You don't have to do 1,000-kilometre expedition to have fun. You can drive 100 Ks and enjoy yourself for the day. But you're out in the wilds. You're out of the rat race. You're out of civilization. You're surrounded by nature. You might have an encounter with wildlife. You're breathing fresh air. You don't need to take the kitchen sink.
Yeah.
I take the bare necessities to do the job. And it doesn't have to be flashy and it doesn't have to be expensive. It's just as long as you've got the right kit, you can do the job and get in the car and go.
Well, and it's probably because you didn't spend all that money on the kit early on that you were actually able to go. Because then you had money for fuel. Yeah. And you had time because you didn't have to work as much.
Yep. And
so it made a totally different outcome for you.
And the classic the example is, I've got a 300 series Land Cruiser and I've got a 6-wheel drive 200 series Cruiser, and my favourite car is the Jeep with no seatbelts, no radio, no air conditioning. Because you're in it.
It's so pure.
You're in the environment. You're surrounded by it. You get the bugs in your teeth and the dirt in your eye, and you come back and you're grinning like a Cheshire cat.
Yep, that's right.
Well, thanks for flying over specifically for this podcast. We know that's the only reason that you came. It wasn't to drive fast cars in Las Vegas. But thanks for all that you've done for the community. Thanks for all you've done for me. I mean, we've all been on some amazing adventures together, and I can't wait to see what's next. Yeah. I think that we need to go to the Kimberley.
Yeah, for sure. I think we got to make that happen.
Yeah, well, I've got a big long bucket list, so I'll share that with you, and you can see what you can fit in.
That sounds good. Brad, you've been such an inspiration, and I'm so grateful for all of your support through the years, and we're really proud of you. It's just amazing to see what you've accomplished for yourself and your family and the people that are around you. And we appreciate you being on the podcast and just sharing your experience. It shows that anything is possible with a Jeep, an old flat fender Jeep, and some bugs in your teeth, smiling like a Cheshire cat.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, appreciate it.
See you down under.
Yep. And we will talk to you next time. Awesome. That was great. That was perfect.
Good.